About a half a second later, the captain comes on and says, "There is nothing wrong with our aircraft, but we have been advised that the airspace is being closed due to a catastrophic event in New York City. The airspace is being cleared, so we are being diverted to Newfoundland. There is space and safe runways for all the heavy bodies, the large aircraft that comes from Europe."
The Broadway musical Come From Away will arrive at Elliott Hall of Music this spring, and there's a local connection to the show.
If you aren't familiar with Come From Away, here's a Reader's Digest version. It's about the true story of a small town in Newfoundland, Canada, that opened their homes to stranded travelers. The Broadway musical Come From Away.
Judi Hawkins currently lives here in Tippecanoe County, and she was on one of the planes that was rerouted to Gander. We're honored to have her in the studio with us this morning to talk about that experience. Welcome, Judi.
Thank you.
So, let's start with the plane. Tell us what it was like, first of all, being on a plane on 9/11 and what you heard from the captain. Give us those first couple of hours.
The first couple of hours, we started out at 10:30 in London, Heathrow, and we were on our way, so we thought, and it was, excuse me, it was a 777, so there was this lovely little camera thing, and you could watch the screen, you know where you were, and all that kind of stuff. So it was like, my husband and I both were seasoned travelers, so we were fine with just kind of relaxing and closing our eyes. So then it was like, we could feel the plane shift, and it was like, wait a minute. He had told us that we were going to be descending as we got closer to Canada to go into O'Hare. Well, we were ascending, and it was like, So I looked at my husband, Colin, and I said, is it my imagination, or are we going up instead of down? And he said, yep, we're going up. And it's like, okay. So about a half a second later, the captain comes on and says, "There is nothing wrong with our aircraft, but we have been advised that the airspace is being closed due to a catastrophic event in New York City. The airspace is being cleared, so we are being diverted to Newfoundland. Gander, Newfoundland is able to he didn't say this, but brain had kicked in, fortunately, to say that there is space and safe runways for all the heavy bodies, the large aircraft that comes from Europe." So sure enough, he said, in order to do that, we're heavy, we have to lighten the load, so the fuel is going to be coming out of the wing. And as soon as he said that, there was fuel coming out of the wing. Yeah, unbelievably enough. Colin and I looked at each other, well, that's one I thought we would never see, but okay. So it was like, okay. So sure enough, the fuel stops, we get in line to be able to go in, and we're one of 38 aircraft that is being landed at Gander. And there is a whole special thing with, as the years have gone by, called 9/11 Clearing the Skies, and it was on National Geographic Channel, and it is perfect. It's the Gander guys. It was just amazing what they did. And of course, then we get on the ground, and then there's like all these other airplanes, and it's like trying to find a little slot to put us into, because it's not, the airport was designed for things to take off and land quickly, not park,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
How long were you on the plane?
Well, probably from beginning to end, we were right at 28 hours.
Wow.
So, yeah, fortunately, we'd had a meal, and but then our next food was supposed to be sort of like a snack, and then it got to dwindle down to Quaker bars, and that sort of took us into the night. And of course, the other thing that our captain said, as soon as we were landed and on the ground and he was situated, he would connect our headsets to the Canadian broadcasting. So we had feed to tell us what was going on. But by this time, both towers had fallen. So we were getting basically a replay, and it was like we didn't really get from the very beginning because of it being repeated, but they just didn't go back to the beginning again. You know, but we still knew, obviously, it was catastrophic, and it was also, and how long do you think we'll be here?
Yeah.
So, because they couldn't take us off of the aircraft until they had customs people, and this was literally a small airport, so to say, so they had like 3 customs people that did different shifts. Had to corral those guys and find volunteers that would be acceptable for processing 6,700 people.
Wow.
Was there like a lot of voices going on, like over here, so it was like kind of hard to decipher what was going on?
No, actually, our plane, I think we were all pretty seasoned travelers, so no one was really upset. And the fact that our captain made sure we had the same information that he was getting. He had direct connection to his United Airlines, but that he still was listening. So he knew what his passengers would know and made sure that we did know. So, because we found out later there were not captains that were that generous. And it was left up to each captain as to what they would tell their passengers. So our guy was straightforward from the very beginning. Some of the other flights were basically told there was a mechanical problem, that they were landing, but you know, how much faith would you put in that if there were 37 other planes besides yours sitting there? It's like, don't think we really trust that. And in the play, there's actually a whole song dedicated to, where are we? And what are they going to do with us?
So going back to those moments that you put on those earphones and you can hear the Canadian broadcast going on, telling you what's going on in New York City.
Yeah.
Can you walk me through those emotions of what you felt like in that moment, hearing that?
What was really amazing, and this would take way back into history, the Hindenburg, the voice that you hear on that announcer, it's a disaster, it's humanity, that's what came to mind. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And were you ever in that point on the plane where you were just like, we're going to be here for a while, let's make some friends? Did you talk to your neighbor for a while?
Well, we met a family. The parents were directly behind us. It was a 777, so there was 2 seats and then I think 6 and then another 2 seats. And the parents were in the seats right behind us. They had 5 children, and they were on their way to Houston for their orientation to be on the Ship of Hope, that is a hospital ship that travels around the world. And it was a sabbatical for them for a year. And so they were going for their orientation. So they were sort of calm type kids to start with, so they weren't a problem at all. So, and then we had, then we had one that was about 12 years old and had another little person that was about 18 months old. And that was the only children that were on the plane. By it being September, most of the kids were in school.
Right.
So that was the reason that those 7 were on the aircraft. But beyond that, we stayed back in coach. We didn't venture up to business class or up to first class. We stayed back in coach. And our other part was, the other thing, again, our captain, great guy, we landed and he says, okay, soon as I have us parked, we will check on facilities to be sure that there is someone here that can take care of the facilities for us. And again, not knowing how long we were going to be on the ground. if somebody had told me that I couldn't go to the Louvre for 28 hours, I'd have really been in trouble. So it was, yeah, thank you, Lord. So he said, you know, as soon as we're parked, we will, you know, the facilities will be taken care of. And they weren't able to actually run the plane, again, not knowing for sure how long, plus we'd already dumped fuel, for air conditioning. So they opened the side doors. So we were able to have a cross draft. And because, of course, this is Newfoundland, Canada, right? Cold.
Yes,
Right.
yes, very cool.
Another, thank you, Lord, heat wave. It
Oh, wow.
was warm the whole 6 days we were there
Wow.
because we didn't have coats.
Yeah.
If we did, they were in the luggage. So, you know, and so it was, you never know what one little blessing, you know, where your little silver lining is going to come from. But they had a heat wave for those 6 days. So that was good.
So you're on the plane for over 24 hours.
Yes.
What happens when you get off? What was the town of Gander like and the people there?
Well, you have to understand, as you will see, if you see the play or read the book, the bus drivers were on strike. So they had to find transportation for all of us too,
Wow.
to get from the airport to wherever they could sort of say, park us, you know. So bus drivers were very kind and they came off a strike to be able to haul these passengers around. But Gander itself, of course, was literally already full because the crews for all the aircraft had to be close to the airplanes. Because first of all, you didn't know when you were going to get the announcement to say, okay, you can go now, let's refuel. So, but there was no ground crew to take care of the aircraft. So it was to the crew to be their own ground crew. So they couldn't be far from their planes. So most of the hotels in Gander were full of the flight crews, which was fine. We were happy to have our captain knowing he was getting his sleep just in case.
Yes, yeah,
We
yes.
wanted to make sure he was rested and ready, you know, whenever. So that meant then they had to find the place for all the rest of us. And by the time they got to us, we were ferried off to, not literally, but ferried off to in our bus to Gambo, a little fishing village that has one stoplight. So this is not a big place. But there was actually, as we figured out later, there was actually 3 of the aircraft passengers in Gambo. We were fortunate enough, I'm allergic to smoke, so we were, you know, that's sort of the little things that you start thinking about, you know. But we were in a Salvation Army, so it was great. And a newer one, so there was this large area for basically sort of a congregation and a beautiful, really nice community hall, which meant they were able to have enough tables and chairs and things for us to feed us. And we find out after we get there, they were ready for us the night before. They already had their food. They have a little cable system within Gambo to, you know, for the community stuff, and it had already gone out that they needed blankets and pillows and prepare some food. So when we got there was food, but it was from the night before. But that was okay. We were happy. But then there was pillows and blankets and things stacked on the pews in the church part. So, yeah. So we were blessed.
Can you talk a little bit about your first interactions with the locals and their attitudes towards this event, especially, you know, most of them not being United States citizens?
Yeah.
Talking about a little bit about how they felt about the 9/11 attacks as well, if that impacted them at all.
Yeah. Well, my first encounter was a person that was in uniform and holding a gun. And at that point in time, I worked for Tony Stewart. Tony Stewart was a NASCAR driver, and I worked at his shop in Indianapolis. I had a Tony Stewart fleece on. So he looks at me and he says, "Oh, Tony Stewart, great." And it's like, and then he just goes back to his solemn face. And it's like, okay. So that was the first word spoken to me. And it was like, okay then. So we go on in, you know, and we do our little customs thing, and they were all just really great. And we walk into the main airport part, and there was food on each side. There was pizzas, and there was sandwiches, and that's in the play too. They had a big map, and it had a big Brit X on it. So this is where you are, because a lot of people really didn't know, but they kept us going. They put out of order signs on the telephone because they couldn't they didn't want us, venturing off to standing in line for the phone. They needed to get us on the bus to be able to get us out of there. So yeah, but everybody was really very, very kind and just really generous, really generous. And our Salvation Army people, we figured out as the days were going by that we were eating their food, because the Salvation Army is one of those that, is always available for people in need. And in the winter, there would be need for food. And it was like we were emptying their pantry out. It's like, whoa, this isn't good. We need to do something here. So we passed the hat, and we came up with about $3,000 for them to be able to go shopping. And we did it again before we left. So they had enough money to go and purchase things and fill up the pantry again. So, but they were great. And their biggest thing was trying to figure out what to feed us, because most of us were okay. Some were vegetarian, some with religions that didn't, So it was like, it was a challenge for them, but they were great, absolutely great, yeah.
So after being on an airplane for over 24 hours and then landing and then being relocated, that's a very stressful situation. So what did you and your other passengers do to kind of like calm down and alleviate that stress during that entire week?
Well, they got us to Gambo, and we were, deposited in front of the Salvation Army. So we go in, they had 2 phones. There was one in the foyer area, and then there was one in the office. So it's like, and here's, 190 of us. It's like, hello. So, okay, they had us in the community hall to tell us this. And so it's like, if you want to queue up, you can, get in line for the phones. And it's like, okay. So we go around the corner, and my husband says, oh, look, there's a Les. And it's like, Les who? And he said, oh, Les McTaggart. Gosh, I haven't seen him for probably 18 years. It was a guy that he had worked with and known in Formula One. He was up in business class. If we had just ventured on up the aisle, we'd have been able to see Les and his wife Helen. But as it was, didn't see them until we got to the Salvation Army. So, but as the time went by, actually, it was like, well, we can do better with this about phones. So they called the phone company. Oh, that was the other thing. They told us, don't worry about calling cards, whatever, because this really was pre-cell phones. And just pick it up and dial, because Canadian Red Cross was paying for all the long distance calls.
Wow.
So again, they were stepping up from the very beginning, So, yeah.
So it's been over 20 years since this experience that you went through in 9/11. And so why do you think people like to continue learning about your story and the story of Come From Away?
It's one of those things that's not unlike Pearl Harbor was for that generation, except this was home ground, and it was something that we pray will never happen again. Plus, there was a lot of us. So down through families and generations after, they've heard the story. Most of my family has heard the story. They'd be able to come in and sit down and do it with me. So, they've heard it. And then when the play came out, it was even more, and an easier way for other generations to see it and get an idea of what really happened in that week.
Yeah.
Because of course it was so centered on really more on New York than any place else, and it's understandable. So you had that daily on your news here. We didn't. That was the other thing. We didn't see anything until Wednesday evening, because the church didn't have they had a television, but they didn't have cable. So it's like, oh, well, okay. So the cable company comes. This is great. There's a little grocery store right next to the Salvation Army, and there's a little apartment upstairs. So there's these outside steps, going up to the apartment. They called the cable guy. The apartment had cable. Cable guy down the steps, across the parking lot, into the church window. So the cable comes in, and they put the one television that they have, and they put it up in the front of the church. So, but we didn't see that. We didn't see anything until late Wednesday. And then there were several that stayed and watched it over and over again. But Colin and I we watched it twice through and kind of looked at each other and said, okay, that's done. We're not going to worry about it because we don't know what's happening with us. So we just sort of concentrated on within our building, so to say. We ventured over, of course, to the little store next door, and the other thing that happened when we first got to the Salvation Army, we had Nurse Eileen that was able to take all of the list of medications that people needed, and there was a little drugstore that if he was not able to fill it, he would be able to get it from Gander. And it was about a 30-minute drive from Gambo to Gander. So no one went without their medications. We were able to, corral the right amount, and we had 3 newlyweds on 3 sets of newlyweds. So out of kindness of everybody's heart, we said, sure, you can stay someplace else. So they found 3 bed and breakfasts for them to be able to stay. And we had a lady that had just had hip surgery, and so she had, of course, been on the aircraft sitting. So they found a home for her to be able to stay in. And we had probably 4 or 5 other people that stayed in private homes. But most of the rest of us we were there. So, yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And you've talked about Come From Away so many times during this interview. Do you think that it fully encapsulates the musical itself, what you and your other friends were feeling during that time?
Very much so. Yeah, they touched on, as I say, they interviewed people for over a year, and they were Canadian, the people that wrote it, so they had an idea about, and especially about Newfoundland being just a very kind and gentle place. At that point in time, I worked for ABC, and we were actually on our way home for me to do a race the next weekend in Dallas. And at that point in time, our color analyst was Jason Priestley, and he's from Canada. So, of course, when I saw him then, when we actually did do the race, I said, if you can sneak it in, because of course, production people don't really want you talking to the families and things at home, on air. So I said, if you can sneak it in, just say thank you to Newfoundland for us. And he did. So, yes. And Les actually worked for the Indy Racing League. So he and I, 2 of us, were actually in Dallas then 2 weeks later. And of course, going through the airport 2 weeks later, it was a ghost town. Oh my gosh, it was really strange, really strange. So anyway, yes, come from away is Newfie speak for you aren't from here. It's basically come from away. Yeah.
What was your reaction when you found out Come From Away was going to be coming to Purdue here in your
Well, I've been really fortunate. Colin and I actually saw it in La Jolla when it premiered in 2015. And I think we were probably close to 2 of the first plane people, as we were affectionately called, to see it. And it was amazing. As we were walking out to go to the car, I told Colin, I said, okay, the couple that wrote it had a play on Broadway. So I said, it's going to be going to Broadway, no doubt. And then the other one is, it's such a shame that the people in Gander and Newfoundland will never see the play. I mean, it's a production, and it's a production. I mean, you've got trucks, and at that point in time, they had a rotating floor. I mean, it was a big deal to be moving it and transporting it and everything. So it was like, they're never going to take this to Newfoundland. They did actually, later on, they actually did. So I was able to get in touch with my friends that I still stay in touch with to get tickets for them. So, and this tour is actually going, I think, for like a week later on in the summer. Yeah. So to say that, so I saw it in La Jolla, and I told Colin, I said, if it gets to Broadway, I'm going. And it's like, okay. And it went to Broadway for 6 years.
And how many times have you seen it since?
I've seen it a total of 14 times.
That's awesome.
Including Broadway.
That's great.
Yeah.
So most of our students here at Purdue, we are old enough to personally remember 9/11.
Yes.
What do you want us to take away from seeing this play Come From Away?
Oh, just to see the kindness that's in the world. And you never know when you're going to need it. Yeah.
That's great.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for being
Quite
here with
welcome.
us today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sharing
Thank
your
you.
Yes.
It was a
story.
pleasure speaking with you today.
Thank
From
you.
all of us and everyone here.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we're excited for the show.
Yes.
Now everybody go see Come From Away.
Yes.
So you come from away.
Tickets for Come From Away can be found on Purdue Convo's website.
Broadway's must-see musical takes you into the heart of the remarkable true story of 7,000 stranded passengers and a small town in Newfoundland that welcomed them. Come From Away. Hailed as the best of the year across North America, Come From Away is a powerful celebration of humanity. Go see this gem of a musical, Come From Away.
April 3rd at Elliott Hall Music. Details at convocations.org. Presented by Purdue Convocations.